The briefing started with the history, U.S.'s involvement with this extraterrestrial, and it started out with a crash at Roswell. But actually, what the crash didn't actually happen in Roswell. Happened closer to Corona, New Mexico, southwest of Corona, New Mexico, and a second crash site that occurred in Magdalena or Horse Mesa, out west of Magdalena, New Mexico. The crash in Magdalena wasn't located until about 49. They showed us the movie. They actually showed us, I believe, a 16 millimeter movie on the recovery, and the narrator of the movie. It was obviously the movie was classified, highly classified. The narrator of the movie detailed when the crash occurred, approximately when the crash occurred in the latter part of June of 1947, and the recovery, showing military personnel at the recovery site, recovering the bodies at the site, and the craft that was at that site. And we were told that the extraterrestrial went to Kirtland Air Force Base at that time, and then on to Los Alamos for some time. And it didn't explain fully in the movie exactly what happened to that extraterrestrial, although it did explain that it died in I believe it was 1952. But the bodies of the extraterrestrials that were found at the scene were in a deep freeze, placed in a deep freeze, and sent to Wright Pat Field in Dayton, Ohio. Now, the craft was more or less an oval, egg-shaped craft. It wasn't saucer-shaped. The creatures were about 4 foot. Some of the creatures were mangled, were heavily injured, and their bodies were torn apart. But 2 of the bodies were pretty much intact, and I'm not sure why. If there was an autopsy, they didn't discuss that. Almost looked like they were nude, but they actually had a very thin but tight-fitting suit on. The fingers had no thumbs, just four fingers, suction devices on their tips of their fingers, and one of them had a head apparatus on it, maybe a helmet or some kind of an earphone or some type of device that they were communicating with the craft or with something else. And they found a number of different objects in the craft that they used, that they experimented with, and found they had a piece of, they thought was plexiglass. It was a rectangular piece of plexiglass that they kept for years before they figured out it was the energy device for the craft. And then they showed us the recovery of the craft in 1949 in Horse Mesa. And that craft, it crashed at the same time the 47 craft crashed. But because of the remoteness of that location, it wasn't detected until a rancher found it on his property in 49. And they did a recovery project on that craft, but the bodies were decayed, and there wasn't much left of the bodies. But the craft was the same type of craft that was found near Corona. It was an oval-shaped craft, but it had damage to it, just like the one at Corona did. And I think the opinion of the scientists were the 2 crafts crashed for some reason, which was never explained. One of the things that is quite disgusting, if you for the people who've ever been briefed in this program, is there's not much out there that's factual. The UFO community disinforms themselves. They people go out there and write books, and without any facts. 90% of everybody that writes these books, these authors, had never been in the military, never worked for the intelligence community, never had a security clearance, and they're just relying on second, third, and fourth-hand information to write a book, and then basically poison their readers and the rest of the UFO community. And so the July craft actually it crashed in the end of June. The recovery project was into July because it was at the end of June, and people just didn't get it right, and the UFO community didn't get it right. Now there's some people out there that have tried to present the facts, but they've been ridiculed, and so their information is not being believed. But just like the Horse Mesa crash in '49, very few people have that factual. They think it was entirely different craft. The craft was exactly the same as the Corona craft, exactly the same. And the damages that they showed in this movie, they showed sketches of the crafts together at some location, and it appeared, if anybody with a logical mind can see, that these crafts crashed together. Why they crashed, I believe the Eben, they called this particular entity that lived in Eben, he probably explained, but I was never briefed into exactly how he explained that the two crafts crashed. I know it was a lightning storm. It was a storm in that time period when it was when they crashed. But the two crashes have been separated by some people and then discounted by others within the UFO community. And that's what is so disgusting and troubling within the UFO community. That's why I have nothing to do with them anymore. I've tried. I've went to UFO conventions and tried to explain what the truth is, and nobody wants to hear you because they've written a book that says it happened this way, and they're not going to listen to you, even though they really don't know the truth. It was about 35 foot in diameter across. 35 by I think 42 or something like that. The interior craft was it didn't have any actual levers or flight control systems that we would identify as a flight control system, or avionics that we would identify as flight avionics. Totally unknown devices in the craft, the steering mechanisms. But they eventually, I think, over some time, figured it out, and it was done all by hands. The creatures would put their hands on controls, and they'd have this headset on, and this headset would somehow control or help them control the aircraft. And the avionics were very, very sophisticated avionics that it took us years, I think, to figure it out. And I was never briefed into that, so I can't talk. I don't know anything about what they figured out. But they took the crafts to Wright Patterson, and at the time, in the late 40s, that was probably the best place to understand or try to figure out. They had the best scientists there to figure out how these crafts float. I was not directly briefed in, but at some time in my career, I read a document in Washington that explained the U.S. scientists' understanding of what this was. It was an energy device that used zero-point energy. That's what they referred it to, as zero-point energy. And it was connected in such a manner that this device could power, from a very small flashlight or a very small watch up to a city. And the power was determined by what the demand on it was. And so each craft had one of these. The craft that crashed in Magdalena, or in Horse Mesa out west, had a larger energy device than the one found in Corona. And I don't think they could understand why, but they operated in the same manner. I was never briefed in that program. I'm sure they did, but I can't talk about that because I can only talk about what I've done and what I've seen.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was never briefed into that. The briefing pertained to the threat posed, the threat that was imposed by extraterrestrial crafts, and then also briefed on some other alien crafts that had visited Earth. There was 4 types of crafts that they showed us, 4 types of extraterrestrials. And they never explained to us where they got the pictures of these extraterrestrials, but there were actually pictures of these weird-looking creatures that showed on the film that were extraterrestrials from some other location different from where the Ebens came from. They had 2 different appendages on their arms. They had basically 2 hands on each arm. And they had several joints in their legs, and they had a bubble type appendage in the front, and a lump or something in the back, and that was one of them. And the other one was
how bit large
they were about the size of a human, average human, about probably between 5 foot and 6 foot tall. And the second one was a very tall, thin, very thin humanoid that had long arms. The arms reached down probably to its knees or halfway between their hips and their feet. They had regular hands. Their faces were very thin. They were almost human looking, unless you really studied them, got real close to them, and then you determined they weren't human. I mean, you couldn't identify them as human beings. They didn't have any hair. They had a cat-like eyes. Their irises were different than that of a human, almost cat-like. And then there was a third creature that was I found this out later, but at the time they just showed the creature, and it looked something like the Eben, but it was bigger. It had a bigger body but I found out later in a briefing I had in 1985 that was a genetically engineered creature that the Ebens made, and that was a briefing in 85 based on an investigation that we were doing. They knew it was genetically engineered, and I don't know how. No. One was a cigar-shaped craft. One was, excuse me, I think it was like 60 or 70 feet long and 20 or 30 feet wide, cigar-shaped. Second one was a regular saucer shape, but it was really wide. It almost looked like one of those tops that the kids play with, really wide. And they were puzzled. I remember in the initial briefing, the colonel said, we still can't figure out how this thing flies. So they pictured it, they took pictures of it, they saw it, but I don't know that they ever actually captured one. At least at that point I didn't know, and they never told us that. And then there was another craft that was very small. It was about the size of a Volkswagen, but it was, a saucer shape, but it was, oval shape, almost like the Eben, but a lot smaller. It was almost like it was a one-seater type of maybe an observation or a reconnaissance craft. And those are the only crafts that that they briefed us that was in the presentation. Yeah, they had photos of them, actually, in the film. They showed photos in the film of these creatures, of these crafts. And the film started, you could tell that the film was an old film when it started, maybe in the 50s or early 50s or late 40s. It didn't have a date on it. But then as the briefing went on, it got more modern. The information in it became more modern, and you could see, based on what was shown in the movie, that it was the information was more current than the first part of the film was. And the pictures of these crafts that we saw in the latter part of, and the crafts were in the latter part of the film, was something that I've seen since on TV on the History Channel that other people have taken, like the McMinnville craft. One of the crafts in there looked just exactly like, if you're familiar with I think that was in 51 or 50 or something, back in the 50s. Yes, the threat to, number one, the first perceived threat was, what were they after? What was it, a reconnaissance? Were these a reconnaissance flight? Were they going to recon before an invasion? Were they going to land and take over some particular facility for their own purpose? Were they short of minerals? Because a lot of what we were told towards the end of the film was that a lot of these crafts later on were seen over uranium mines and other mining areas, and so they're concerned. What are they after? Are they after uranium or turn into plutonium, or exactly what they're after? And so our job was to investigate, and determine was there a threat, and if there was a threat, report it up the chain of command. And well, they inferred it that that they were concerned, because the way the colonel put it, and I think this was some of his own feelings at the time when he talked to us later, was that we just had a drop 2 bombs, nuclear weapons on a country. We had a test of that bomb a few months earlier, or a few weeks earlier, in New Mexico, and this probably was observed by these aliens somewhere, whether they were doing reconnaissance back then or how they have figured it out. So they came here to observe and try to figure out what the heck was that. And maybe they didn't have a weapon like that, and maybe they did, and maybe they're concerned about this Earth for some particular reason, or maybe they were after those weapons. And that was a concern, because security of nuclear weapons was the #1 priority of the United States. Air Force, because the Air Force had a lot of nuclear weapons. One of the primary missions for the OSI was protect counterintelligence operations against the threat of nuclear weapons. And Kirtland Air Force Base had a lot of nuclear weapons. And New Mexico had, at the time, like you said, the 509th Bomb Wing at Roswell had the only nuclear capable strike force in the United States at that time.
If you like this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.